and welcome to Let's Talk About It. This is your host, Taylor, and I am so thrilled about today's guest. She is the author of a book coming out called Trans Sex: Clinical Approaches to Trans Sexualities and Erotic Embodiments. And she also taught my course at Modern Sex Therapy Institute for my PhD in clinical sexology. And the whole presentation was so amazing. I was just like, we've got to get her on the podcast and share more of this information and share some of the things that really caused me to sit back and reflect and really kind of change my approaches both professionally and personally kind of going forward in life, which obviously takes time and is things I'm going to have to practice at daily. But I'm so excited to introduce you all to Lucie Fielding. She is a white, queer, non-binary femme and a resident in counseling practicing in Charlottesville. She received her master's in counseling psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. She also holds a PhD in French from Northwestern University, where she specialized in 18th century literature, histories of sexuality, and erotic literature. Her background in literature and history attunes her to the many ways that image, metaphor, and cultural scripts shape and inform the narratives that we carry with us. And as we move throughout the world as well, as to how these narratives inscribe themselves on our bodies. Our bodies carry so much. I honestly had such a blast learning from Lucie in my class. So I am just absolutely thrilled to have her on the podcast today. So we're going to get into identities. We're going to get into imagination. We're going to get into gender curiosity. We're going to get into intergenerational wisdom and community care. We're going to get into feeling safe versus feeling bounded. And we're going to talk about all of this both from a professional standpoint of practicing within the therapeutic space, but also personally. So hopefully, whether you're a provider in the helping field or not, you can take something away from this personally, if not also professionally. So with all of that, let's talk about it. All right. Welcome, Lucie, to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time out and for being open to coming on the show today. There are very few guests that I've been this excited to have on. So I'm very, very excited to have you on. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And you're too kind. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to chat, and especially since you were in that class a few weeks ago. So
Yeah. I'm excited about all of my guests, but I definitely seeing you present and walking through everything that you taught us throughout the class the last month, I guess it was just so, I felt like you were such a model as to how I would love to see more instructors move, and also as to how I would want to approach teaching. And so part of that was literally just from how you even started your presentation, with the kind of focus on what does identity look like, with even just identifying yourself. And you included your social location and all of this. And I was just this is the model. This is how it should be. You definitely have had the most inclusive, most accessible presentation that I've ever seen in my entire education history, through my undergrad, through my graduate, and even from some classmates who have seen you teach in other capacities were she's always very accessible and she comes correct. So thank you for all of that, but would love to kind of start off with that kind of calling the identities and kind of naming the identities that you bring into the room. And now I'm I should start on my podcast like this.
Yeah. To engage in location of self, I am a white, queer, kinky, polyamorous, non-binary trans femme. I'm also Jewish, witchy, visibly able-bodied, and 44 years old. I live in Central Virginia, and I practice in Charlottesville, Virginia. Although during the pandemic, I practice all over Virginia. And I specialize in sex therapy and gender therapy and kink aware and kink knowledgeable therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you speak to like the importance of naming these identities, of being aware of these identities, not just within the like educational realm, but within the therapeutic realm, and even maybe just within the social individual realm?
Well, I think it comes from a few political places. The first is it comes from the conviction that our identity constellations matter, and they are often subjects like sex that therapists have, at least historically, and for the most part in the present, still kind of shy away from. They're a little nervous about it. And I really want to put it out there because I want to really be clear from the very outset that this is a subject that is important to our work together. It's going to impact how, our differences, our similarities, are going to impact how we are viewing the world and what kinds of cultural stories and images and are going to be in the room with us. And so it's an invitation to anyone that I am teaching or that I am speaking with as a therapist to really say, like, this is not a topic that's off limits. Indeed, I encourage it. Let's bring it in the room. The other piece of it, and it is that I serve small communities within a small community. There's a lot in our ethical codes as therapists about what we call dual relationships or multiple relationships. Yeah. And when you practice in rural environments or you specialize in working with communities, particular communities, and particularly marginalized communities, it helps, it helps for me to really put out there from the very outset, like, that this is who I am. This is, and, you are welcome here, and not just welcome, but you're going to be seen here. Like you can sit on my couch, my virtual couch at this point, and be seen, be heard, be held in the fullness of your being. And a lot of clients come to, queer therapists or kinky therapists, polyamorous, trans therapists, precisely because we are kinky. They see us in community. And it's not that I am, like, I'm always very clear about where the ethical bounds are. So like if I'm at but that social location brings that conversation in the room so that we can, like, if we're both going to be at an event, we can determine, okay, do I go to that event? If I go, like, what's our story? How are we going to interact or not interact? And then really making it clear we're going to process it before and we're going to process it afterwards. And so it's just being forthright and trying to also humanize me, that like and the pandemic has made this especially important. I think, it's like we're in the room with you. We're in the trauma soup with you. The last year has been collective trauma after collective trauma. And we're still in it. And even though there's so much hope with the vaccines, getting in arms, so excited about that. there's still a lot of trauma being held in the body.
Yeah.
And, and sometimes it helps for a therapist to really just come out and say, like, I'm in it with you. Like, I don't have any special insight into who you are and, what concerns you're bringing to me. I'm in it with you. If I'm going to probably turn off the ring light and turn off the telehealth platform, and I'm going to get into my PJs too, and I'm going to sit on the couch, and I'm going to drink, have ice cream, and and maybe have a glass of wine or something. It's like, I'm in it. I'm not always okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels so freeing, I think, as a professional too, to be able to identify that. And like you said, I do agree here that especially when you are working with marginalized communities, especially when you are working with folks who carry different identities than you, it is a form of self-disclosure that we're so frequently told, not to do. And that means like blank slate is like kind of the best way to work with people. But it helps provide, I think, that sense of being seen. I think it's also it's a practice of kind of modeling that embodiment in yourself for your clients, maybe for your students, for your friends, for whatever, that, you can sit in your wholeness. You can kind of identify your wholeness. You can identify your humanness, and folks can either kind of relate to that. They can have some respect for that. They can have questions about that in terms of how they even feel, comfortable to work with you or not. I think it is a really important part of self-disclosure that, thinking back to undergrad and graduate school, like we're not really taught how we really introduce or identify ourselves within the therapeutic space. So I love that you shared that, and I am definitely in agreement with that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you mentioned the blank slate or therapeutic neutrality, and frankly, from a social justice perspective, from a political perspective, it's a morally untenable position to me, because if we are denying that, if we're operating as if we have a vantage place from nowhere, then, what are we communicating to people that we're working with, that we're sitting with, that we're caring with? It communicates that that we don't see the injustices, the minority stress, the insidious trauma, the everyday microaggressions that our clients are living with and dealing with. And instead, it says, oh no, we're not going to talk about that. That's not important.
Yeah.
And pardon my French, but bullshit.
Yeah. All the French is welcome here.
Awesome. Call me Deb.
Yes. And it's also taking a look, right, at, who are the founders in this field? Who are the ones that are determining the professional standards of this field?
Yeah.
White, cis, straight men like Freud.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not sure how important social justice was there.
Yeah. He, there's a lot that is in Freud that is fabulous and revolutionary.
Yeah.
And so much of, it also just replicates the, white and colonial and particularly settler colonial dynamics of erasure and displacement. And so, I want to unsettle our practices or queer our practices, as it were.
I love that. I want to unsettle this practice. I love it. I love it. And I think it also speaks to, right, I mean, essentially the colonization, the imperialism, it's white supremacy. And I think even as we kind of get into some of these topics that I wanted to cover that you spoke on, in terms of gender curiosity and, you know, the failures of our imagination, like, I'll let you speak to that topic, but just the point here that so much of the injustice that we do have today, so much of the, I think, failure of imagination that you'll speak on, is in large part due to white supremacy that has like instilled these ideals of what is, quote, normal.
Yeah. You know, I think about Dr. Angela Davis speaking in late June, in the midst of, you know, the protests last summer around police abolition and prison abolition, and she had this wonderful. She was on a panel and she made this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I do not have her quote in front of me, but it was like, you know, we must look to trans and non-binary folks because they have unsettled, you know, something that we thought we could take for granted, you know, which is to say the gender binary. And if you can unsettle that, if you can explode the gender binary, what else is possible? You know, suddenly abolitional movements really don't look like some kind of, they don't look as radical as they're made out to be. I mean, it seems realizable. It seems like, yeah, we can do this, and we can do this in our lifetimes, and we don't have to wait for the next generation and just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah. We'll have to put a link to that clip where she's speaking, and maybe it speaks to that. That might be helpful to put down in our episode notes if we can find that. All right, I want to take a short break right here because one of the questions I'm always asked of like how you can get better in touch with your eroticism, with your erotic self, right? Like what are resources, what are practices that you all can engage with? And I could not be more excited to have them as a sponsor of the podcast on my favorite platforms called Dipsea. So if you haven't heard me talk about Dipsea before, I mean, it's a great way to like unwind after a long day of Zoom calls for self-care, resetting and reconnecting with yourself. Highly recommend using Dipsea. So it's an audio app that's full of short, sexy stories that are really like designed and do a great job of turning you on. Again, definitely help you feel like you are really there, like someone is really talking to you, like you're really just immersed in the scenario. And I mean, it just adds so much more excitement and feels so much more erotic and sexy. And you can find stories about like literally any kind of scenario here. They release new stories every week, so there's always something to explore no matter what you're into or what turns you on. And I mean, you can do this, you know, if you're struggling to kind of get in the mood, maybe your partner wants to have a sexy night and you're kind of like, oh, I don't really know, I'm really stressed out and there's like a lot of things on my mind and a lot of things I need to do. You can maybe throw on Dipsea and listen to a little story and, you know, pretend like you're listening to a podcast, but really you're like getting in the mood, you know? And of course, for listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering a 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/Taylor. I mean, I don't think I could have asked them to provide you all with a better deal here. That's a 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/Taylor. 30 days, you know how many sexy, erotic stories you can experience in 30 days? Wow, this is great. Again, you can go to dipsystories.com/Taylor and be sure to check them out, share them with a friend, share them with a partner, and don't forget to use that link so that you can get the 30-day free trial. Again, dipsystories.com/Taylor. Okay. And with that fun little resource, super appreciative and love having them as a partner of this podcast, we can now get on back to the show. Yeah, there's a lot to unsettle. There's a lot to unpack. The thing that I think really stuck out in terms of like work that I think already as the like LGBTQI movement and visibility and awareness has grown in my lifetime, that I've had to challenge myself on this and kind of unpack this. And so I was really happy to see it come up in your presentation, and really happy to have therapists in particular unpack this. And that was the unethical curiosity. And I think as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, yes, because it's like you see so much of that where people think, well, they're just curious. They're just curious. Like they just want to know. And a lot of it I could relate to my own like racial curiosity experiences of people like, what are you? Like, oh, I'm just curious. Like, just curious. What are you? You know?
Where are you from?
Yeah. Like I could relate on that level. And I think it's like, yeah, I've noticed those things have came up internally for me in the past. I don't necessarily like vocalize that, 'cause that's like not my business. Like, especially if I don't know someone, like what is the purpose of that? But you spoke about unethical curiosity. And I think a lot of that also was kind of stemming from us having, failure in our imagination. So I'd love for you to kind of speak a little bit as to what that is and how those are both kind of how they influence each other.
Well, so first, an imaginative failure, as I talk about it, is we talk in therapy about empathic failures. It's when a therapist fails to empathize in particular ways with their client in particular moments. And an imaginative failure, I see an empathic failure as a subset of imaginative failures, which is when our imaginations fail us because of the cultural scripts, the dominant discourses that are coming with us and our clients in the room. We're walking around with them, and in many ways, like really some lovely cultural scripts, some, that come from from our ancestors, from our lineage, from, I like to tell my clients, you are somebody's legacy. And somebody will be your legacy, to put yourself in the sweep of a community that has struggled and will continue to struggle, but that we care for one another, not just self-care, but community care. And so I really wanted to look at the ways that, particularly with respect to trans and non-binary folks in therapy, although as you point out, it's like the impact of white supremacy, the impact of heteronormativity or mononormativity or any kind of normativity or ism, will creep in with those scripts. And what they do is that they serve to foreclose what we think is possible, and they sometimes can lurk behind the questions that we ask. And so like unethical curiosity, like I use curiosity a lot in my work, but I also want to make sure that I am tuning myself to the possibility that when I lean in and say, I'm curious, can we do this, or can I ask about this? If I preface that with, I'm curious, Like some clients are going to be like, oh, that's going to be great. And others are going to be bracing themselves internally for like, oh God, what's coming down the pike? Because like, I've been there. Like, I write in my book, that of an experience of when I came out to one of my first supervisors. I was an intern in therapy, and I was working for, of all things, a sexual and intimate partner violence organization. And I came out to my supervisor, and he, the questions always start out okay. And then at some point it just like, it turns. And in those moments, like I freeze sometimes, and so like, I'm like, how did I find myself here that I'm suddenly being asked or feeling a pressure to answer questions about like what my genitals look like, how I have sex, with whom I have sex, am I going to stay together with my wife, and how do we have sex? These are kinds of questions that I would get and that I got in that meeting. And and so like I always want to ask, like, who is this for? Who is this curiosity for? Why are we asking this? Is this because there's an actual utility, or do we feel entitled to know something? If there's an entitlement to know, then that's something to maybe pause, check in with your body. Like, what's going on here? Do I think that because I'm a parent or I'm a lover or I'm a friend that I am entitled to this information that I wouldn't ask of somebody just randomly? Like, would I ask you about your genitals and what they look like? No, I wouldn't. And in no way would I do that.
And I'm not sure in what capacity it's helpful for a supervisor to know how their supervisee has sex with their partner.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, I'm really not sure.
All this was, I mean, like it was being prefaced all the time with like, I'm curious. And then, it would end with like, fascinating. And I like, I walked out of that room just like feeling so icky, dirty, and objectifying, fetishized, denuded, and like I was subject to just this penetrating gaze.
Oh, that phrase. Yeah, I feel that. This penetrating gaze. Yeah, I think it's, folks often feel that curiosity is innocent.
Yeah.
And because that
virtue.
that because it is innocent, it is good intentioned. Because it is good intentioned, they couldn't possibly be causing harm, or that it's okay because it's good intentioned.
Well, and sometimes we may have good intent, but the questions that we're asking, we are allowing ourselves to become tools of social control by like asking questions that say an insurance company feels like they need to know, or like what some kind of like disembodied talking head feels like they need to know. There's this great video, and I'll give you the link to it. It's Janet Mok, and she's sitting with this was right after her really disastrous interview with Piers Morgan. And we have Meghan Markle fame most recently. Like, anyway, but so like he he would do all these things, and he would always preface it by like, well, people need to know. It's like, who are these people that need to know? And so she did this like flip the script video with a journalist who was cis, and she asked her all of the questions that journalists have asked her. And that's like a perfect example of like what like an unethical curiosity can feel like. I mean, like wait until the end of that video where they process the experience. And, the journalist is like, oh God, I felt, that was awful. Yeah. And, it's like, been there way too many times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, this is where I think the harm is so apparent. Like, I think it's so apparent as you experience it, but for those who don't experience it, this is kind of like the underlayer that they don't usually see, that they can't understand, because there isn't space for them to be able to relate to that. For folks who are marginalized and experience that kind of like very fetishizing, objectifying, dehumanizing, innocent curiosity. And
which tends to focus for trans people on our genitals. And how we have sex. So it's a specific form of genital curiosity. Yeah. And it seems like the more intimate you are with a person, the more there seems to be an entitlement to know on the part of someone. So, and that includes therapists, it's like, and so I just want us to take a step back. It's not to say like you have to walk on eggshells around me, or that like, I mean, what I want to do is I want to make these things, these dynamics visible. I mean, it's like terms like cis and trans, like as prefix, like when we say like on a dating profile, when like it's always a point where I'm like, oh, okay, I might be able to swipe right on you if you describe yourself as cis, in there, because it communicates to me these terms. They're not to like, we don't design them to be aggravating or to create another binary. It is, I mean, maybe a little bit aggravating, but it's really there because, like trans and non-binary folks, gender expansive folks, we think a lot about gender. And so when we use prefixes like cis and trans, it's to make visible the fact that we all, cis and trans, we all have a relationship with gender. And it's just that for some of us, it's more visible than with others.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a short little break, but it's going to be a little sexy break because I want to share again about the Discreet series from our amazing partner, Bellesa Boutique. If y'all don't already know, Bellesa's sex toy boutique, bboutique.co, is the #1 rated sex toy store on Google. They literally have over 25,000 reviews. And I'm like, if you haven't seen this yet, I'm surprised, but like Cardi B loves Bellesa. She's like, literally she posts about them and I'm like, hey, I know them. But the #1 thing that people ask about at Bellesa Boutique, and anytime I share about sex toys, the #1 question I get is about discretion. So I really want to share again the Discreet series by Bellesa. It's really like all over Instagram, and these vibes come in these really, really cute little clamshell charging cases. So it looks like it's like a compact makeup case, but it's actually a charging case for your vibrator. The vibrator fits perfectly inside of it, and you just plug in the USB rechargeable cord on the outside. And the toy is waterproof, and they use body safe materials. I personally own the Balesa vibe, so you've probably seen it on my Instagram, and I can confirm 10 out of 10. Okay. Love their toys. Love this discreet series. And of course, want to help y'all lovely listeners out. You can get 15% off all sex toys at B Boutique and free US shipping with the code Taylor15. That's a deal. So again, that's BOUTIQUE.co and get 15% off and free US shipping with the code Taylor15. And I mean, come on, y'all. Owning, like, you can own the same vibrators like friggin' Cardi B. Like, you gotta step your game up. Come on, let's get with it. Let's get this discreet vibrator series, okay? Again, that's bboutique.co and Taylor15 for free shipping and 15% off all sex toys. So you're welcome. And thank you for your support. And thank you to Balesa for being boss-ass bitches per usual. And we can now get back to the show. It is so different, unfortunately, to have anything outside of male, female be identified in terms of our genders. And I think about the kids who are like being born today, the kids who are like 3, 4, 5 years old now, who are going to grow up with way different than what I grew up with, with this already built into the culture of being able to identify pronouns, right? Being able to identify your gender, and there being somewhat of an openness in terms of having like opportunity and having a right to explore what that actually is for you.
And a right that is very precarious right now in many states. As you know, unfortunately, there have been a lot of state legislatures that have started passing bills that have basically made it criminal for children and teens to get access to gender-affirming care.
Yeah, even to emergency care. And this was Kansas, is that right? Kansas?
Kansas is one of them. South Dakota. There's also some legislation around trans women participating in sports, which is also a white supremacy issue.
Yes.
So there was, I believe, Missouri, Arkansas. There's Texas was considering one. If you're looking to kind of follow what's going on at a state legislature level, the Twitter feed of Chase Strangio, who's a lawyer for the ACLU, does such incredible work tracking what's going on in the courts and in the legislatures. I heart Chase so much. I don't know them, but I don't know them. But oh my God, yeah.
Well, we'll definitely link that in the notes there so that people can follow that and keep up there. And I think, it's like some steps back, some steps forward, some steps backwards, right? Like we've definitely, I think there is a openness around, gender today more than there was at least when I was born and when I was in school. And now I feel like sound like I'm like so old and like out of it or something, like I'm not hip anymore. I'm not hip. But there are still people that are like consistently anti anything that is not heteronormative and are really putting people's lives in danger and putting people's lives at risk. So I'm wondering if we can speak a little bit about community care for a second, because I know you kind of mentioned that earlier, and that was a part of your presentation that I really appreciated as well. Just talking about like intergenerational wisdom and community care. I think it is so important, you know, not just for like trans community, but even in my own kind of work, doing a lot of processing of being biracial, being multiracial, and of like, where are the people that we look to that are multiracial, right? To share kind of this wisdom of what this very unique experience is like. And so I'm wondering within, you know, trans community, within LGBTQ community, of what that intergenerational wisdom and community care can look like.
Yeah. So first of all, like, a lot of times the intergenerational wisdom and the resilience that I love talking about is it comes from a place of struggle and from pain and indeed from trauma. So we talk about intergenerational trauma, which was first kind of discussed in relationship to Jewish folks and the Holocaust. And so like, I'm Jewish, I did not experience the Holocaust, but it's the idea that I carry that trauma with me as a Jewish femme.
It changes people's DNA. Like when you experience that trauma and that gets passed down and that gets held in your body, that's very, very real.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, and so, you know, we all come from, we are all here because, you know, somebody, you know, whether it was like in Europe, a serfdom, a condition of serfdom, or from, you know, experiencing our ancestors experiencing the transatlantic slave trade, or our ancestors, you know, experiencing the erasure of their indigenous cultural identities and practices as part of, you know, the settling process and the process of imperialism. And so, but alongside that, there's a trauma therapist, Resmaa Menakem, whose beautiful book, My Grandmother's Hands, I go out and get it. It's wonderful. And Resmaa talks about how intergenerational trauma that are the wordless stories that our bodies carry. And I read that passage and I was like, oh, what other wordless stories do our bodies carry? Because he then talks about the intergenerational resilience that you know, that the communities, that cultures will come up with over time mechanisms of resilience to preserve culture, to transmit it. The way that I talk about it sometimes is it's kind of like intergenerational wisdom is kind of like that, you know, oil-stained, crumpled up, ink splattered recipe, the cherished recipe that's like passed down from one grandmother to the next, and you know, generation to generation, and it just gets more and more oily and soiled and everything like that. But it carries, you know, when you make that recipe, you are calling upon that grandmother, that great grandmother, you know, who first committed it to paper. And so communities like the queer and trans community, we, you know, like I did not experience the Compton cafeteria riots. I didn't experience the Stonewall riots. I didn't But I am connected through lineage to people who did struggle, who threw bricks. Folks like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who fought and bled and fucked, and loudly proclaimed their entitlement to take up space. And so and we have learned through successive, traumas in our communities, how to take care of ourselves because governments aren't necessarily going to do that because, and I think, the pandemic really made that visible for me, as a year ago, I was really grappling, how do I sit with this? How do I can't hold this. This is, what do I do? And then I started reading works by queer folks and trans folks who were writing in the 80s and 90s at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the United States. And seeing their stories and seeing and hearing them in 1987 and in, 1992, writing, we know how to take care of ourselves. We are ingenious. We developed safer sex. It's there's all of the, we know how to operationalize mutual aid funds and to care for one another and when connection and touch feels so precarious, so risky, we know how to connect. We know how to care with one another. And so that's really what I want to highlight, that we have that baked into our communities. We are part of a legacy of struggle, and that queer lineage is our queer future.
Yeah. Feels empowering.
Thanks. I'd like to hope so. I mean, certainly it gave me a lot of hope a year ago to read that work and to feel like I was touching hands with folks that are no longer with us or died, but some folks are still with us and whose writing and whose fierceness is still passed like that cherished family recipe.
Yeah. Feeling in community. And the word that's coming up for me here is bounded. And
held.
Yeah, held. All right, we're going to take a little mini break here because I know there might be a lot of information here. And afterwards, I want to share something fun that maybe you all can do if you just need a little, zone out a little bit. If you just need to get away from everyday world for a little bit and do something to just kind of blow off some steam, maybe slightly mindless, but also kind of mindful in a fun way. This is honestly something I've used for months now. And that is Best Fiends. And it's a game. Okay. It's an app and it's all these different puzzle games. And I'll literally this has been my bedtime routine is I brush my teeth, do my face, get in bed, I journal a page, and then I start playing Best Fiends, and maybe I have Netflix on while I play it on my phone. But it is one of the top-rated games. It has over 100 million people that have downloaded it, and it's they've got all these really cute characters. I got to upgrade them after every level. I think I'm almost at level 100 now, and it gets more difficult or like more challenging, like as you go along. So at first I was like, oh, like this is kind of like easy. Like I can do this. And like I'm matching all the mushrooms to the other mushrooms and I'm matching all the flowers to the other flowers. But then it's like, there's bombs on here now. And then I got to like make sure I defeat all the slugs and I got to make sure I get like 50 leaves. And then I got to get like 30 flowers. And I got to make sure that like my players are upgraded and that they evolve. Naya loves the game too. She's only 6. So it's like, she can't like fully play at the level I'm playing at now, which I love using because then she like gets all jealous and tries to beat me, but she can't yet. So I just want to share this as a really fun resource. I love using them and probably play it at least every other day. And just gives me a nice little like mental checkout, which we could all use. There's a lot of things going on in the world. So you deserve a little bit of, fun play. So you can download Best Fiends for free today on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's Friends without the R, Best Fiends. And with all of that now, we can get back to the show. You spoke about feeling safe versus feeling bounded. Mm-hmm. And literally made me rethink every time I use the word safe or safety. Yeah. And this is like my favorite thing about education. You know, you can go through a whole thing using one word one way, and then you learn something and you absorb it and you're like, holy shit, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. Like, this is actually the way forward. And you speak a little bit about the difference between feeling safe and feeling bounded.
Mm-hmm. So I'm really glad that resonated with Super. You. And I'd love to kind of, I'd love to ask you about like how that has shifted things with you, because, basically it comes from this idea that we talk, especially like in trauma modality, it's like we talk about it, safety as feeling safe as a precondition for kind of processing trauma. And we say like, well, we have to establish safety, that sense of safety before we can do anything. And I thought about like, one, have I ever done anything that has benefited me from a place of feeling safe? First of all, no. Because when we are in our comfort zones, like, why are we going to, what's the incentive to change? Why would we do that? So it's like, a dear friend and colleague of mine, Doug Braun-Harvey, talks about how ambivalence is essential to the change process. You know, that we need to feel that sense of like, of risk and benefit, and that like, okay, there's something that serves me about staying put. There's something that doesn't serve me if I stay put. The other recognition is that nothing we do, or very few things that we do, are 100% safe. Like hopping in our cars, not 100% safe. Therapy, not 100% safe. And especially like as a kinky femme, we in the kink and BDSM community have a value and acronym, RAC, Risk Aware Consensual Kink. And what that, and it in many ways is an adjustment, a replacement for an earlier acronym, Safe, Sane, Consensual, or SSC. And, first of all, to speak about sanity is an ableist value, but safety is also like, nothing that we do is 100% safe. So let's instead be risk aware. Let's have really clear conversations and negotiations around, like what we're actually doing here and how much risk do each of us want to, who are a party to this experience, how much risk do we want to take on? how much of that liability do we want to take on? The last thing is, kind of what I alluded to earlier, which is, and I get this insight from the fabulous cultural worker and activist Kai-Ching Tom, who, talks about, the problem of safety is that like very few people in the United States, for example, can claim an expectation of feeling safe. Yeah. Expect it. Who are those people? They tend to be white, cis, straight. They tend to be able-bodied. They tend to be, and they tend to be, they tend to be high SES, socioeconomic status. Yeah. And so men, indeed, and so like, whereas like I walk around the world, even my own neighborhood, and I don't feel like 100% safe. Yeah. I'm always, every room that I walk in, like I am, there's going to be a part of me, and I consider it a superpower, by the way, that kind of hypervigilance, of that I'm going to be scanning the room and I'm going to be seeing like, okay, where are the exits? Yeah. Where, how many people are in here? Like where, I live in Central Virginia. So like, the appearance of a Confederate flag is not, outside the realm of possibility. But, so if I see one, I'm like, oh, I'm out of here, like I'm going. So I don't feel safe all the time as a femme, as a trans person, as a queer person, and so it's to really recognize that. And so boundedness is this idea of, okay, well, if we can't feel safe, we can feel held. We can, and the example that I often give is that like, for self-care, one of the things that I do is I do aerial dance. So I like climb up into the silks and I, contort and do drops and oh, by the way, I am deathly afraid of heights. And yet like I'm like 7 feet off the ground, 10 feet off the ground. And, and doing these drops and it's that like, I never feel safe. Yeah. But I am safe. And I know that the silks will hold me. And I know that if I'm in my body, that my body will hold me. That even if I fall, I will know how to catch myself. And I've fallen and I know how to catch myself. And so like, and that ability that because I've drilled that and I've done that, I can say like, I trust my body and I feel bounded in my body. And so that's something we can achieve, whether it's in therapy or in our lives. We can feel held by our bodies. We can feel held by relationships. We can feel held by community.
Yeah. All right. I want to take a short break right here. I want to do a little bit of a check-in here for anyone who is currently struggling with drug or alcohol addiction, because there is a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of help out there for you. So I want to share with you all a sponsor of the podcast, which I'm very appreciative and grateful and really happy to partner with here, called Recovery Centers of America. You can call them at 1-800-945-8795 today. And I want you to really write that number down. I want you to put it in a note somewhere so that you have it. Maybe it's for yourself. Maybe it's for a friend, because even if you are struggling with drugs or alcohol addiction right now, you are worthy of recovery. You do not have to be in this place. Recovery Centers of America answers the phone and admits patients 24/7. And because safety is a top priority, all patients and staff are routinely tested for COVID-19. Their expert team of physicians and medical professionals will treat you with compassion and with dignity, which you are so deserving and so worthy of. And they provide an evidence-based treatment plan that is custom tailored to your specific needs. So you're not just going to be checked into a little box here. This is going to be really tailored and specific to you. Recovery Centers of America's best-in-class inpatient and outpatient care are offered both in person and via telehealth therapy. So it is affordable and it is accessible. And I really want you all to, again, jot down this number, and you can call today, 1-800-945-8795. That's 1-800-945-8795. And now we can get back to the show. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. So much just came up for me listening to you.
Would you mind sharing a little bit? I mean,
Well, yeah, no, I think it's on several different levels here. So like on a professional level, like talking about safety with clients, wanting them to feel safe in this space has always been something I've said, right, has been a topic of discussion, while at the same time, even in my disclosure form, it's that there is risk here, this might get a little more tough before it gets better. Exactly. There is some of that informed consent. There is some of that awareness of risk within how do we create this to be a safe space. But then it's like, thinking about, the magic happens outside your comfort zone, right? So we have to kind of go there. But to look at therapy as this is a safe space, we're creating a safe space for our clients, it just sat so much differently for me, because I do look at this work as holding space. You are sharing space with that person. And it might be a feeling of safety that someone gets, but really they're being held. Really, they are taking emotional risk. Really, emotionally, it's not necessarily safe, right? So it got me thinking about that, and just in terms of how I discuss that with clients, and how I aim to even shape that as a space that folks can feel held in, right? Not just safe, but feel held and feel supported. I think also just in my own personal life, and I haven't looked at this or thought of this in so long, but I just now pulled it up. In one of my adult relationships, he sent me this very long letter thing, and we sent letters back and forth kind of assessing the end of our relationship, about how we were not happy with certain things. And it always felt like none of my boundaries were ever respected in this relationship, that I was constantly pushed on my boundaries. This was a relationship with a white man, and it definitely felt like there were just parts of my existence that he didn't understand. And even as you said, in your identities, navigating through the world, where it's like there are very few people that actually have the privilege or the expectation or the assumption or the trust that they will be safe in a work environment, walking down the street, in a romantic relationship. That's so few people, where I'm like, holy shit, that's not ever where I'm operating from. And in this one letter, he wrote about my deep-rooted need for security, and that he understood I needed to feel safe from, quote, safety from intruders with my 3 locks, because my door just automatically comes with 3 locks on it, and I lock all 3 before I go to bed. That's like, if I'm home by myself, I want all 3 locks locked. Quote, safety from discomfort. I don't like to be cold. Safety from foods that I don't like. Safety from from your body losing control. No drinking and no experimental drugs. And I've never had a partner come inside of me with no condom on. That's a big no-no for me, because to me, I've always explained it this way. If someone is going to come their penis inside my vagina, that purpose is to create a baby. I'm not risking that with anyone that I'm not married to. So for me, that's like, I'm saving that for my husband, for the person I marry. And he listed, quote, safety from the fear of sex in the form that virgin mentality and unhealthy cum fears. And so much, and then just acknowledging that he offers little to no security, because what he can provide and what he wants to give to a partner is essentially the opposite of what I needed. And so when you talk about safety, when you talk about boundedness, it's like in so many of even those things that were listed, I don't feel seen in, I don't feel heard in, I don't feel respected in. And what I'm really searching for is that feeling of being held, right? Being in those silks, right? Like that imagery that you list there of doing that is so beautiful and just really paints it for me, because it's like, yeah, you can trust yourself that you're gonna, you know where you are, you can pull yourself, you can kind of have that trust in your body. And you're also still not totally safe, but you are held. And you do have things, the ropes are almost kind of like your coping skills, right? Like, you can kind of pull here and pull there. So I don't know. A lot came up in that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think, I suppose the question that I wanted to ask, and it is also like, and what do you notice? What happens when you do feel held? When you do feel seen? When you do feel a sense of trust, and that your boundaries are being respected? When you feel that sense of boundedness, what do you notice in your body, or in your or what I would refer to as your embodied psyche?
Yeah. I'm way more playful. I feel way more free. It's like the walls come down, and it's like I'm less intense. I'm way less defensive when I feel held and supported and seen. It allows almost that kind of like childlike freedom, childlike play part of my personality to come out. And that's where like very few people get to see that side of me, because very few people hold me in that space. Certainly not the internet.
Yeah, certainly not the internet. No.
Yeah, certainly not there. But I think it does. It changes when I think about safety versus boundedness. It changes the expectation or the image of what I'm searching for, of what I'm trying to create for myself. It changes that.
Yeah. The playfulness can come out, the vulnerability. It makes space for vulnerability. Or just for like whimsy, caprice, or like hard things to come up. Like, I love describing therapy as like, it's a space, it's a container where you can think thoughts and feel feelings and experience embodied sensations that, it might not feel good to experience them alone, And so in therapy, in the midst of a feeling of boundedness, we can experience that. We can face things that we couldn't necessarily face alone.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a good example of this, but what comes up for me of like how that is different and how we can kind of take those things on. Even one of the last points that he listed in that letter of unhealthy come fears was also, he really didn't like that I didn't, like, from a blowjob, let him come in my mouth. And that was just like a no for me. I just didn't want to do that. In my current partner now, where I feel so safe, bounded, where I feel seen and supported and heard, I enjoy doing that now. And I'm like, you can absolutely do that. Like, I like when we do it like that. So it definitely, like you said, opens up this different layer of vulnerability when you actually feel bounded and feel safe. And a point here that you also brought up in your presentation, and I want to kind of like round us off on a little bit here, is intimate justice. And I think as we talk about boundedness, right, and who even gets the privilege of feeling quote unquote safe, right, that like that also has to do with a bit of what I think would be social justice, disability justice, intimate justice, all the forms of justice for folks who are marginalized to be able to actually sit in spaces where they can be bounded and perhaps even safe.
Yeah. And intimate justice is steeped in, and this is continually affirmed by the World Association for Sexual Health, that pleasure is an essential component to sexual health. We don't talk about it enough, but it needs to be central. It's like establish consent, establish honesty, holding. But why are we there except for pleasure? The only problem is, if we are all entitled to pleasure, or we're all entitled to desire, we don't all necessarily feel that we have access to that entitlement ourselves. And it's where we get like dynamics like, like internalized transphobia, or internalized misogyny, or internalized transphobia. And so it's this idea that, we can't just like say like, hey baby, was it good for you? That cliche, I just won't punch anybody who like leans over and says that. But like, that's what like a lot of satisfaction research has historically been. And so like, we need to be taking into account to kind of bring us back to the first thing that we talked about, to identity, like our social locations impact what our horizons for expecting or feeling that we deserve pleasure and desire, to have our desires met, our needs met, our boundaries respected and met. And so like, like I've had so many experiences, particularly early in my gender transition, and I would say even well before that, where, like I would kind of sacrifice my desires or my needs because like I didn't want to be a burden, or I was ashamed of them, or or like I thought that like it would, that I wasn't entitled to that, pleasure. It's like, oh no, I'm a giver. I'm a pleaser, like I want to do that. My pleasure is your pleasure. And that's great. Like sometimes my pleasure is a partner's pleasure. And that's, can be transcendent. But again, I think it's this basis that everyone in that experience is entitled to pleasure, is entitled to desire. You're not necessarily entitled to having a desire met at a particular time and with a particular person. But you are entitled to having that desire. Like you're not, so much of our work is about discharging sexual shame and saying like, like actually that fantasy that you have, like it is shared by thousands and thousands of people. and you are normal. You are okay. And you might not be able to enact the letter of that fantasy, but like, I am sure that you can find somebody out there who would absolutely love to help you find a creative way to enact it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and like, even to your point or your experience of, you know, your pleasure feeling like a burden or, you know, being a giver, like, I feel like that also tells me sometimes, though, that your partner, the person you're in that, or persons that you're in that shared experience with, also aren't prioritizing your pleasure as well. You know, sometimes that is, and you might feel that like pushback, right? Of like, oh, no, haven't experienced that. What are you trying to do? I don't know. Don't put the attention on me. But I think like a lot of the times, even just that dynamic in itself is problematic, because that also just shows that there is a repeated experience of it not being prioritized, and that feeling uncomfortable of like, why are you trying to focus on me?
Yeah. I mean, because like one thing that my clients will often say when I talk about, you know, like wants and boundaries and communicating them is like, Lucie, I don't know what I want. What if I don't know what I want? That's all well and good, but like, how do I know? And, you know, and there are ways to do that. There are ways to drop into, you know, what does your body want in this moment? What would be, the expression that I use is, what would be feels good? Yes, right now.
Yeah.
You know, like if you check in with your body and you feel like, even if it's the tiniest voice that says, feels good, yes, feels bad, no, like you don't have to necessarily do anything with it you know, but at first it's just like, recognize that your body is telling you a lot of things all the time. Like if you put a pizza box anywhere in my vicinity, you know, hot pizza, like I am going to be like, feels good. Yes.
Yeah.
I want that, you know, you know, or like if you put the scent of patchouli in front of me, oh God, I hate patchouli so much. Feels bad. No, I don't want to get anywhere near that shit. You know, like hate it. But like, you know, if we use things like that, you know, that really allow us to check in and feel that strong yes, that strong no, then when we are in the midst of sex or play or sensual experience, erotic experience, then we can then tune in and say like, oh, actually, like, I think an adjustment is needed here, or I don't feel like I'm being held in this experience, you know, and maybe you just get up and walk out. And I've done that. And it's so empowering to be like, you're just not listening to me. I am getting up and I'm walking out.
I feel like I see that in movies and shows sometimes where I'm like, oh God, like I wish like younger Taylor had the like confidence to be like, screw this and walk out of the room. Cause it does, it looks so empowering. Like, God, there's so many times I wish I would have just walked out of the room, but didn't feel like I could. And when you speak to that of like getting to know those feel good yeses and those feel bad nos, like what has that process looked like for you? If you're open to sharing, you know, it sounds like you have kind of walked out of some spaces to honor yourself and know that this was a feel bad no. But, you know, how have you kind of gotten in touch with what that eroticism and what that pleasure looks like for you?
Well, I think some of it has been, you know, that for me, coming into my femme, you know, has been about like, I spent the first 37 years of my life in my head. And it's been, how do I give myself the gift of feeling?
Yeah.
And sometimes that gift of feeling is going to be euphoric. And sometimes it's going to feel like, you know, like when a cat brings you a dead bird and it's like, present. And you're like, oh, God, thank you. I know that you think that this is a great thing, but I did not need that dead bird.
Yeah, I did not ask for that.
I did not ask for that. And so like, and it took like, partners where I felt so held in those relationships. It took, it took experiences like with dance and kind of like, and there's the other thing about silks is that it gives me the freedom to suck at something. Like it's one realm. I will never be an aerialist.
Yeah.
It's like, there's some people who go out every morning and go surfing and they will never catch that wave, but gosh darn it, they love the fucking thing. And it's like, I love silks and I have the freedom to just be awkward. And that's one of the things if I could give us, all of us this gift is like, lean into the awkward, swan dive into the awkward. It doesn't have to be like, it is in, film and television where, it's like how many times have folks like actually had sex on stairs? Oh my God, it hurts.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you're not a porn star. Sex is allowed to be awkward.
Yeah. Well, and even, on porn sets, like what you don't see is the awkwardness. You don't, like, except on certain, sets, like, and they tend to be, ethical porn and queer porn, where, but like, for the most part, you're not seeing the negotiation. You're not seeing, people trying to like, who, are negotiating bodies and are like, sex is inherently messy and it's fabulous that it is. Like, it's like, there's so many smells and fluids and, and sounds.
Smells,
like, and that's great. It's wonderful. Like it's a sensual playground and our bodies are magically multi-orgasmic, polymorphously perverse playgrounds of wonder. And let's spend time with those playgrounds. That's what I want if I could wish anything for, for your listeners, for my clients, it's like to come into that recognition that your body is always already perfect as it is, normal. And, like there are things you may wish to change to ensure that your body you feel more affirmed in your gender or in your sexuality. But gosh, like we are capable of so much. We're infinitely expansive. And I just, I want us all to feel that entitlement to pleasure and to desire and to feeling held in their experiences. Yeah.
Oh, you've given so much to our time today. And I mean, already again, I'm like, I learned so much in your presentation and the program, but like I've already learned again so much here and have more reflecting to do after this. But I think kind of a space I want to leave us off on, also because I know majority of the listeners of this podcast are people who are cis, I'd say maybe majority heterosexual, but maybe some who are within the queer community. But, I think there's so many things in this episode already that they can probably take away, but I'm wondering if there's anything specific for you that you really want cis, straight-bodied, heteronormative folks to recognize that they can learn from trans folks, from the queer community. If there's anything specific that sticks out for you that you want to kind of pass along as a message of like, pay attention to this, you can learn this.
Yeah. Approach your body and your partner's bodies from a beginner's mind, from a position that, I don't know what this is. Like, if I'm having sex with somebody with vulva, like I may have had a number of sexual encounters, like with folks with vulvas, but I don't know the specificity of this vulva. Like, what does kind of touch does this part like? Does this partner want and need to feel yummy? And so, that's the first thing. I think we map so many, again, cultural scripts onto like what sex is, what's involved. Like, I've said this before in other experiences, but like you can have hours of mind-blowing sex with a flaccid penis. You can have hours of mind-blowing sex without involving any genitals or chests or breasts. Like, that's something you can experience pleasure from being spanked. You can experience pleasure from, certain kinds of caress, or from tantric breathing practices, like eye gazing. You can, from so many forms of touch. And again, our bodies, like, if we just like look at, for example, penises as just like the only good penis is a hard penetrating penis, then like we're missing out on the fact that like there are so many, the nerves are still there. The erection is merely about, is about enlarging the surface area where the pleasure can be experienced and making it more pronounced. But for the most part, it's like, if you want to have penetrative PIV sex, penis and vagina sex, absolutely. But like, there's so many other things that you can do and that you can experience. And what does that open up if suddenly you don't feel like you have to measure up to a particular standard of performance? What does that do for you and your sex life? How can you perhaps feel more held and more seen? And how can we bring different energies and intentions to our bodies and to other people's bodies? I don't want to prattle on too much, but no, yeah,
I could literally listen to you all day. I have before. I'll do it again. Yeah, no, I think there's like so much in this that folks can take away. And I mean, I definitely feel so seen and heard, both from myself and from you, in talking through all of this. So again, just want to thank you so freaking much for sharing this work that you do, for sharing your knowledge and sharing your own personal experiences as well. I do know you have a book coming out very soon called Trans Sex, and I've already pre-ordered it and I cannot wait for it to get here. But would love for you to share a bit of like where people can find your work, of how people can get your book, and all of that.
Cool. Well, I'm on Instagram at Lucie Fielding. My website, luciefielding.com. My book, Trans Sex, Clinical Approaches to Transsexualities and Erotic Embodiments, comes out next month, from Routledge. You can find it on Amazon, of course, or Routledge. And, I have on my Instagram and on my website some pre-order codes for 20% off list price if you use the Routledge site. Books are expensive, but like books are also so yummy and sensual.
Yeah, they're amazing. And screw Amazon if you can.
Yes, please. Bookshop.org. Also, like a lot of the independent bookshops that go through there. Like pretty much where you need to find it, you can find it. And if you don't, then have your bookstore carry it, please.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and for everything. It's been amazing having you on. Thank you.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
All right, that does it for today's episode. Thank you so much for making it all the way through and keeping your ears, your hearts, and your minds open. It would mean so much to me if you could take a second or two after listening to this episode to leave a review on iTunes and let me know what you're enjoying about the show. I love reading, what your favorite episodes are, where you guys listen, and definitely feel free to share this with a friend. I mean, part of how we break down the stigmas around these topics is by talking about them, right? And sharing them with more people. So definitely share the podcast. And again, really wanting to include all of you in this podcast. So if you have questions or you want to share a thought or an experience, please send in a voice memo to ask.letstalkaboutit@gmail.com. And I'm really excited to keep having these conversations and breaking down these stigmas. So thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk to you next time.